Imagine you and your buddies are thinking about robbing a bank. How would you pull it off? Sneak in at night like a movie? Talk your way past guards like some smooth cons? Or maybe go loud with guns blazing? But that's just the first part. You gotta figure out how to get away clean. Who's driving the getaway car? How many people are you trusting with this plan? And what about the money? Can you turn it into something legit? Will you have to lay low for a while? The FBI says a surprising thing. Most bank robbers who hit just one bank get away with it. But the more you do it, the higher the chances you get caught. By the fourth bank, it's a coin toss whether you're going to prison. But what if you didn't stop at 4? What if you robbed over 100 banks? That was William Francis Sutton, a man who made a career out of robbing banks. This is the story of America's most notorious bank robber. Let us go back to the beginning. Sutton was born in Brooklyn in 1901, the son of Irish immigrants. He was a smart kid from a good, hard-working family. Despite their poverty, his parents always provided for him and his siblings. But Brooklyn was rough, a crime-ridden Irish ghetto where violence was a part of daily life. The streets had more influence on Sutton than his home did, and he turned to crime early on. At just 12 years old, he broke into a department store and emptied the register, spending the loot on candy and soda. Sutton dreamed of going to college to become a lawyer, but his family couldn't afford it. Instead, he landed a job at an insurance company, where he learned the ins and outs of bank security. He then moved to a new job and started stealing postage stamps from the mailroom to sell on the black market. Things were going well until his co-workers got caught, shattering his belief in his own cleverness. His first arrest came after he broke into his girlfriend's dad's house. His Catholic girlfriend refused to sleep with him until they were married, so Sutton decided to rob her dad's safe to get the money he needed. He made off with $100,000 at just 18 years old. Sutton used the stolen money foolishly, buying a mink coat for his girlfriend, a bunch of suits and shoes, and even a brand new car, despite not knowing how to drive. He wrecked the car's clutch after just 100 miles, leading to their arrest in a small town in northern New York, near the Canadian border. The father of Sutton's girlfriend offered him a deal back home, probation in exchange for never seeing the girl again. He took the deal but quickly returned to a life of crime. Along with his friends, including Eddie Wilson, Sutton ran illegal gambling houses and dance halls. It wasn't wildly profitable, but they managed until Sutton had to kick out a troublemaker named Happy Gleason from one of his clubs. Gleason, a thug and police informant, was widely disliked. After their altercation, it was no surprise when Gleason was gunned down, and the police quickly targeted Sutton and Wilson as suspects. Brooklyn PD, known for their rough tactics, issued warrants for their arrest. To avoid getting framed for a murder they didn't commit, Sutton and Wilson fled to Manhattan, just across the Brooklyn Bridge. In the 1920s, moving 6 miles away was enough to evade the law, as Brooklyn PD had no jurisdiction there, and Manhattan cops weren't interested. This simple move saved them from a murder charge. Sutton tried to stay clean for a while, working normal jobs, but crime always pulled him back. He worked as a welder at a shipyard, which got him thinking about cutting open safes. Hanging out with actors and chorus girls, he became fascinated with makeup and costumes, loving how he could disguise himself as anyone. His last honest job was repairing burglar alarms, a gig he took to get better at breaking them. One night, a gang blew up the company safe where he worked, and private detectives quickly pegged Sutton as the prime suspect. With the murder charge still looming over him, he couldn't afford to stick around for questioning. He changed his name and moved uptown, marking the moment he became a professional thief. From then on, every creative impulse was directed towards planning the perfect heist. His next job was a simple one. After spending a few days watching a jewelry store, Sutton noticed the manager arrived an hour before opening. Sutton came by with a stolen watch, tapping on the window and insisting it needed immediate repair. Against his better judgment, the owner opened the door, only to find Sutton's pistol there. Sutton calmly emptied the safe, knowing no one would come by for another hour. However, he only got away with half of what he expected, because his partner chickened out at the last minute. Sutton's downfall often came from the partners he chose. Despite this, he managed to pull off a few more heists using the same technique, hitting a shoe store for $800 and an insurance company for another $1,000. Big money in the 1920s. But these were just simple stick-up, and Sutton, being a smart guy, created more challenging jobs. The challenge came through Eddie Wilson, who introduced him to the Tate gang led by Doc Tate, a master thief. Tate was an elegant man in his 40s who hated violence and preferred a cat burglar's approach. He and Sutton hit it off, and soon they were cracking safes all over the Northeast. Their method was simple: pick a town, case 6 or 7 businesses, and hit them all in 1 or 2 nights. Never in New York City. Small towns were easy targets because they never expected such a sophisticated gang. During one one heist in Boston, they were interrupted by a janitor and had to escape through a side window. As they passed a police station, Sutton left his lockpicks as a joke. A journalist found them before the cops and wrote a scathing article, which Sutton kept as a trophy for years. They were making about $2,000 a month each, but the good times didn't last. The crew spent as much as they made. Doc Tate bragged about his skills and racked up a huge gambling debt. Sutton became a fixture in the Broadway theater crowd, throwing lavish parties at his upscale midtown apartment. Manufacturers were catching on, adding heavy shielding plates to protect the tumblers inside safes. When that didn't work, they started using hardening agents to toughen the plates against drills. Sutton knew that traditional safe cracking methods were becoming obsolete, so he honed his metallurgy skills, preparing for the day when welding would be his only option. The end of Sutton's partnership with the Tate gang came during a heist at a department store in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Tate estimated they could score an easy $1 million, their biggest yet, but Sutton had doubts. The alarms were state-of-the-art, and the safe was nearly impossible to drill. Sutton suggested using welding torches, but Doc Tate's pride couldn't accept that his safe cracking skills weren't enough. He forbade welding, and the job turned into a disaster. After 9 fruitless hours, they gave up at dawn. Back in New York, the gang decided to split. Doc Tate was caught a few months later and died in federal prison. Sutton had to act fast after the gang's breakup. His expensive lifestyle and dwindling funds pushed him to pull a daytime heist at a jewelry store near a courthouse. Sutton believed no one would expect a robbery with so many cops around. He walked in while the store was open, locked the front door, cut the display, and took a bag full of diamonds, all without anyone, including the clerk, noticing. A week later, at a baseball game, Sutton felt a tap on his shoulder. It was the private detectives from the burglar alarm company. He was arrested and taken back to Brooklyn. Sam Todd, the head detective, threw Sutton down a flight of steel stairs. Sutton later said it was a miracle he didn't fracture his skull. He was then tied to a chair and beaten with a rubber hose until dawn. But Sutton didn't break under the torture. Though guilty of many crimes, he was no killer. He spent 9 months in a Brooklyn jail awaiting trial. Happy Gleason's friends testified against him, claiming Sutton was the killer, while Sutton's friends provided an alibi. The trial seesawed, and Sutton's lawyers gave him a grim choice: plead to a lesser charge or risk execution. You can't believe the system is grinding you down. After 7 hours of deliberation, the jury found Sutton innocent. His lawyer told him to consider each day of freedom a profit. True to his nature, Sutton immediately thought about robbing a bank upon release. He and Wilson targeted a bank in Ozone Park, Midtown Manhattan. After careful planning, they broke into the bank's basement, intending to drill up into the safe and use welding torches to cut through. The plan was overly complex. They had to build a wooden platform to reach the ceiling, then drill through 5 inches of concrete, which took longer than expected. By 7:30 the next morning, with 2 cops in the lobby, they had abandoned the job, leaving their welding torches behind. Wilson was driving the getaway car, but he lost control on a wet road and crashed into a truck. They exchanged details with the truck driver and moved on. However, the crash soon came back to haunt them. Later that day, while having lunch with Sutton's mum, whom he hadn't seen in 5 years, a cop showed up, curious about the banged-up car. The officer mentioned a hit and run from the night before and asked them to come to the station to fill out some forms. Not wanting to upset Sutton's mom, they complied and provided their details. Unbeknownst to them, the police had already traced the welding equipment left in the bank basement back to the acetylene gas vendor, who identified Wilson. This linked Wilson to Sutton because of the car crash, and they were both charged with burglary and grand larceny. Wilson, choosing to defend himself, was quickly convicted and sentenced to 10 years. Sutton hired a defense team. The prosecution presented a fake witness who claimed to have seen Sutton fleeing the robbery. However, Sutton's lawyer discredited the witness, leaving the case weak. The jury hung, and the state offered Sutton a misdemeanor charge to avoid a retrial, which he declined. At the retrial, Sutton faced a different judge and was sentenced to 10 years in Sing Sing. Sing Sing State Penitentiary, named after the nearby town of Ossining, was infamous in gangster fiction but was relatively progressive. Located near New York, it allowed easy visitation and packages from the outside. Although the prison food was terrible, inmates could cook their own meals. There were education and rehabilitation programs, and some inmates were influential socialites who ensured problems were swiftly resolved. The corrupt deputy warden allowed gambling, trade, and even some drinking. Sutton quickly made the right connections and settled in, enjoying a job in the garden. Just as he was beginning to appreciate the peaceful life at Sing Sing, Sutton was transferred to Dannemora due to overcrowding. building. Located near the Canadian border and surrounded by thick forest, Dannemora was a harsh, freezing prison known for its brutal conditions. The prison was infested with bedbugs, lacked running water in cells, and inmates got only 2 minutes of shower time a week, 1 minute hot, 1 cold. Jobs were available, but Sutton was denied one after refusing to rat out an inmate who had knifed another. So he spent his days reading anything he could find: classic literature, chemistry, psychology, anything to stay sane. Escape attempts were futile. The nearest town was full of guards and the forests were impossible to navigate. Sutton endured 3 years there before being granted parole, a shocking stroke of luck. But before his release, a massive riot erupted. Lifelong inmates, fed up with the abuse, attacked the guards during lunch. It was the most awesome, frightening thing I have ever experienced, Sutton later said. The prisoners turned into a hate-crazed mob, smashing into workshops and grabbing anything that could be used as a weapon. They lit buildings on fire and charged at the walls, only to be met with machine gun fire from the towers. Amid the chaos and smoke, Sutton watched a friend get gunned down just meters away. The army was called in to quell the riot. After 5 hours of gunfire, grenades and fire hoses, it finally ended. Officially, only 3 men died, but Sutton believed he saw more than that. The brutal beatings from guards likely resulted in additional, unreported casualties. Sutton took his share of beatings, but parole saved him. On release, the warden warned him, "If you ever come back here, Sutton, you won't leave alive." At 28, Sutton was determined to go straight. Facing a mandatory 25-year sentence for any future conviction, he moved in with his mother in Brooklyn and landed a job in landscape gardening. He started dating a local girl he'd been writing to, and they got married. She soon became pregnant, and things were looking up until the stock market crash of 1929. Like millions of Americans, Sutton lost his job. With few options left, he returned to crime to support his family during the Great Depression. Sutton chose Jack Bassett, a fellow inmate from Dannemora, as his new partner. Despite considering Bassett loyal and trustworthy, it was a terrible choice because Bassett was not very bright, leading to many problems. Their plan mirrored the jewelry store heist with the broken watch. Sutton would act, gain entry, then pull out a gun and rob the place. Their first target was Rosenthal Brothers, a jewelry store. On the morning of the robbery, Sutton watched through the window as the porter, Mr. Lewis, arrived at 7:30 a.m. to open the store. Once the alarms were off, Sutton, disguised as a mailman, rang the bell. Mr. Lewis opened the door, and Sutton tricked him with a fake telegram for Mr. Rosenthal. When Lewis reached for the envelope, Sutton shoved the door open, brandished his gun, and ordered Lewis inside. Bassett, watching from across the street, ran over and shut the door. Sutton forced Lewis to stand at the window, pretending everything was normal, while Bassett tied up the arriving employees. The head salesman, who had the combination, was marched to the back and ordered to open the safe. After 15 minutes of fiddling with the lock and an attempt by Lewis to alert his boss by phone, they walked out with $150,000 in jewels. They threw on overcoats as disguises and left the building, the burglar alarm ringing as they jogged to their getaway car. Sutton's new system worked flawlessly. Confident he could get in anywhere, he and Bassett hit the Richmond Hill Bank for $19,000, the Converse Bank outside Boston, and various banks and jewelers across New York. They even expanded into Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. They used a police uniform so often that the NYPD began investigating their own for rogue cops. Banks started using subtle warning systems, like an upturned calendar in the window, to alert employees if the first person inside was taken hostage. Sutton, always thorough in his research, quickly caught on to these tactics. He put great effort into his disguises, earning the nickname Willie the Actor from the papers. He altered his appearance by plucking his eyebrows, dyeing his hair, shaving his head, and changing his weight. Sutton conducted his robberies with a gentlemanly demeanor, using the sophistication he picked up from Broadway. One victim compared having him rob them to going to the movies with the usher carrying a gun. Despite his charm, all Sutton's robberies were armed, though he never fired a shot. The idea of pulling the trigger disturbed him deeply. He preferred using a pistol but carried a Tommy gun for extra intimidation. Their only trouble came when a teenager escaped Bassett's control and ran for the door. They abandoned the job and ran to their car, but it wouldn't start. Sutton, thinking quickly, leaned casually against the car window as the cop approached. The officer, puzzled by Sutton's calmness, slowed down. The moment the car started, Sutton dove in and they sped away, leaving the cop no time to react. This was the only time they had to make a quick getaway. Sutton used his share to buy a house in a wealthy suburb, telling his wife the money came from his real estate business. She probably knew the truth but played along, picking him up from the station every day. Bassett, on the other hand, bought expensive suits and maintained multiple girlfriends in different apartments, spending extravagantly and drawing unwanted attention. Sutton had to loan Bassett money to keep their partnership afloat. Eventually, Bassett's wife, Kitty, suspected something was wrong. She met Sutton for lunch, confronting him about Bassett's infidelity. Sutton spun a story about the other woman being a criminal associate, but he knew it wouldn't hold. He tracked Bassett down, insisting he clean up his home life. "Jack, if we ever take a fall, we'll get 30 years each as second offenders. Do you realize the mess you're causing? If Kitty loses it, we're done," Sutton warned Bassett. But Bassett, being foolish, lied about dumping his girlfriends and just hid his favorite in a new apartment. Kitty found out and in a rage turned them both into the police. Sutton evaded capture for a week, even knocking down 2 detectives during a foot chase. They finally caught him by using Kitty, whom he still trusted, to set up a meeting. The cops ambushed him over coffee and cake. Bassett, proving his stupidity, spilled everything, revealing they'd robbed over 60 banks. Only one man, Mr. Lewis from Rosenthal's, could positively identify Sutton out of over 100 people brought in for the lineup. The police then beat Sutton with phone books, trying to get information on mob boss Dutch Schultz, whom Sutton despised but wouldn't betray. Schultz's retribution would be deadly in prison. When Sutton stayed silent, the detectives stripped him, tied him to a metal table, and beat him with rubber hoses. He was left bruised and in pain, and he was only allowed to see a doctor after 4 days. The cops also arrested his pregnant wife, who handed over all the money she had. Schultz sent corrupt ex-judge Arthur Vitale to defend Sutton, but Vitale's reputation led to an unfair trial. Sutton was convicted and as a second-time offender sentenced to 30 years. He was back in prison at 29 after just 15 months of freedom. Sutton later reflected, "There's a thrill in breaking out of jail after meticulous planning, with everyone watching against all odds. It's like nothing else in the world." Sing Sing had been rebuilt with higher walls, more barbed wire, and stronger steel bars. Sutton visited the warden, insisting he stay at Sing Sing to appeal his sentence. His new conviction meant he had to serve the remainder of his first sentence, which meant a return to Dannemora. Facing a potential death sentence, Sutton plotted his escape from prison. After a failed attempt involving an underground tunnel, he devised a more intricate plan. Using hacksaw blades, he quietly cut through his cell bars over several nights, exploiting the guards' overconfidence in the prison's security. Sutton meticulously prepared for months, creating wax impressions of keys and enlisting help from a fellow inmate, Egan. One night, they made their move. Using their handmade keys, they navigated through 7 locked doors to reach the prison yard. There, they used ladders from the mess hall to scale the walls. In a stroke of luck, they found an unguarded tower with a rope hanging down the outer wall. They quickly dropped to the ground and fled in Sutton's wife's getaway car. She skillfully navigated back roads in the dark, having practiced the route for months. The escape was a resounding success, with Sutton tasting freedom after just 25 months in custody. However, aware of the risks, he ended his marriage shortly after to protect his daughter from potentially losing both parents to incarceration. After leaving his wife, Sutton didn't stay single for long. He found a new girlfriend within a few months. He also reached out to Bo Weinberg, a confidant of mob boss Dutch Schultz, who gave him $1,500 and an unlimited line of credit. They visited Egan's brother at the docks, but the meeting was rough. Egan's brother warned Sutton not to work with Egan, calling him a hopeless drunk and unreliable. Sutton reunited with Eddie Wilson, now out on parole, and the three attempted a bank job in the Bronx. It failed because Egan got drunk instead of showing up. Sutton decided to leave New York for Philadelphia, but couldn't resist one last dig at the NYPD. He robbed the Corn Exchange Bank at 110th and Broadway, right in Manhattan. Disguised as a cop, he waved to traffic police, rounded up the employees, flirted with tellers while Eddie emptied the safe, and then casually walked out to catch the subway home. Sutton recalled it as one of his most enjoyable crimes. In Philadelphia, Sutton and Wilson teamed up with a new partner, Palengo, and began robbing banks. They hit about 20 banks before security measures became too challenging. After an aborted job due to a witness, they started targeting smaller towns like Scranton. Determined to succeed at the previously failed bank, they cut a hole in the ceiling, rappelled down, disabled the alarm, and surprised the guard. When the guard locked the door, he found Sutton waiting with a pistol. Sutton and Wilson cleared out the safe and walked out, telling the gathered crowd, "Just a minute, the bank will open shortly." However, Palengo's flashy lifestyle drew police attention. When they tailed Palengo, they caught Wilson picking him up. Wilson tried to evade them, but was shot and permanently disabled. Palengo confessed everything, including Sutton's whereabouts. whereabouts. On February 6, 1935, a joint operation by the Philadelphia and New York police stormed Sutton's apartment. In a swift trial without counsel, Sutton was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in the Eastern State Penitentiary. Although once infamous for its harsh conditions, by Sutton's time, the prison had improved significantly. Eastern State Penitentiary had a craft market program, but Sutton wasn't allowed near tools due to his escape record. He spent his first year in isolation and another 6 months before mingling with other prisoners. Sutton became a secretary to the prison psychiatrist, a job he got by practicing typing for 16 hours a day on a paper mock-up of a typewriter. This quiet job allowed him to network and watch for escape opportunities. He also took refresher courses in various subjects. His first escape attempt came through a friend, Adam the plumber, who discovered the main sewer. They believed there was a gate leading to the city sewer system beneath the main tower. During a guard switch, Adam uncovered a manhole, and Sutton, naked, descended into the sewer with a torch and metal rods. The pipe was filled with cockroaches and sludge. As he wriggled through, the water level rose and he encountered solid waste. Reaching the basin, Sutton tried to find the exit gate but failed. In total darkness, his torch died and he almost drowned. Panicked and covered in filth, he pounded the pipe's roof until Adam pulled him out. They abandoned the sewer plan. Sutton's next idea relied on heavy summer fog in Philadelphia. He noticed a guard change at midnight and figured the fog could cover his escape. He needed a rope, a hook, and a dummy to fool the bed check done 5 minutes after midnight. Under close watch, he planned meticulously, knowing this was his best chance for freedom. Sutton built a secret compartment in his cell floor, hiding a rope and hook. He made a plaster cast of his face with construction putty and painted it using supplies from the craft market. He saved hair from his haircuts for a wig, even making a cast of his hand for added realism. After a year of preparation, a heavy fog finally rolled in. He placed the dummy in his bed and unbolted the window frame, but just as he was about to escape, other prisoners triggered alarms by mistiming their break. Sutton had to go back to bed. The next morning, guards found his secret compartment and he was thrown into solitary for 6 more months. By the time he returned to the general population, he'd been in Eastern State for 6 years. His next attempt was even more elaborate. Sutton and 6 others removed a granite slab from a cell and dug a 95-foot tunnel during yard time. They used spoons and a nearly handleless shovel, disposing of dirt by sifting it into the yard and later dumping it into the sewer. The tunnel was slow and dangerous, prone to flooding and collapse. One afternoon they hit a water pocket, flooding the tunnel and forcing them to dig underwater. After months, they reached under the outer wall and found grass. One Monday morning, 12 men crawled through the tunnel to escape, only to emerge at the feet of 2 passing cops. Sutton bolted but was quickly recaptured along with the others. Furious, the warden threatened to shoot Sutton. They were taken to court without proper representation and Sutton protested the unconstitutionality of the proceeding. All 12 were convicted of jailbreaking, with Sutton receiving an additional 10 to 20 years for being the ringleader. Sutton and 5 others were transferred to Holmesburg, an escape-proof prison. Sutton escaped in 16 months. Holmesburg prison was designed like Eastern State, but with bigger walls and miles away from the city. Run by a brutal doctor, 5 inmates were gunned down in a failed escape attempt the previous year. The heavily guarded walls were defended by machine guns. Sutton and his friends were placed in isolation and never allowed out, not even for meals. Their meals were delivered by a single guard twice a day. There were no shops or industries at Holmesburg. Sutton, nearly 50, fell seriously ill and was sent back to his cell against the doctor's orders. He remained in poor health for 2 months. A fellow inmate, a nurse, informed Sutton about 2 ladders in the isolation block's cellar that could be used to climb the outer wall during a blizzard. To escape, Sutton needed to get through a heavy steel door and past the guards. There were 8 guards and a captain at night, carrying no guns for security reasons. Sutton befriended Langer, a hated informant housed in isolation for protection. Lang, believing in their friendship, provided Sutton with a pistol and hacksaw blades. The other inmates were skeptical, fearing it was a setup, but after a week it was clear Sutton had the only firearm in the prison. On February 10th, during a snowstorm, the men broke out of their cells and ambushed the guard during the hourly check. They took hostages, stole uniforms, and moved through the prison. They gathered ladders, ropes, and a hook, locking 5 guards in a utility closet. With snow covering the ground, Sutton ordered the deputies to set up the ladders against the wall. The guards on the wall noticed the group and challenged them. Sutton claimed they were an emergency repair crew, but the guards didn't believe him and started shooting. Everyone hit the deck, and Sutton jabbed his pistol into the captain's stomach, forcing him to call out that they were conducting repairs. Recognizing the captain's voice, the guards stopped shooting. The prisoners propped the ladder against the wall, climbed it, and scaled down the other side. The captain, too scared to say anything, didn't alert anyone. Sutton and his men hijacked a milk truck heading out for its morning run and drove back to Philly. They paid for some milk with a spare $5 bill, abandoned the truck in an alley, and made their way to a safe house for new clothes and money. The cops soon caught up, shots were fired, and the group scattered. Sutton managed to escape, hiding out in Philadelphia with no money or connections. The next day, newspapers were filled with news of the escape. Sutton hitchhiked to Princeton to see an old associate, Tommy Kling, who gave him $500 and a job offer. Sutton decided to lay low and took a job at an old folks' home, staying for 2.5 years, finding fulfillment in helping the elderly. Despite his new life, Sutton couldn't resist the lure of crime. He, Kling, and another man, Venuta, started robbing banks in New York State. Sutton kept a low profile at the old folks' home between jobs until his picture appeared in the newspapers. Forced to quit, he moved in with his girlfriend, cherishing their time together, knowing it was temporary. A bank job by another gang using Halloween masks mistakenly linked Sutton to the crime. To avoid capture, he left his girlfriend for $700 and took a bus back to Manhattan. 3 days later, she was arrested as a witness and suspect. Sutton continued working but faced issues with his partner, Tommy Kling, who was losing money on bad investments. Sutton confronted a shady lawyer with a gun to recover some of the lost money. Meanwhile, Sutton was planning a complicated heist on a large midtown bank, feeling the pressure. One day, Sutton's car wouldn't start, forcing him to take the subway. Recognized by someone on the train, he was tailed and eventually ran into 2 cops while buying a car battery. Kling's girlfriend later led detectives to both Sutton and Kling's apartments, sealing their fate. Sutton once again found himself partnered with the wrong person. His arrest was a spectacle, with the NYPD parading him in front of the press, declaring an end to the longest manhunt in New York history. Placed under heavy guard, he wasn't allowed anything in his cell that could be used to escape, not even a belt buckle, shoes, or toothbrush. Despite his notoriety, Sutton became a folk hero. People cheered his name, seeing him as a symbol against the banks they despised. However, Sutton didn't see himself as a revolutionary. He was a professional thief, only interested in his own gains. While awaiting trial, his daughter visited, introducing him to his grandson. His ex-wife had remarried, and his mother still lived in Brooklyn, fighting off journalists. Sutton was sentenced to 45 years in Attica, 15 for the Corn Exchange bank robbery, and 30 for a firearm possession violation of his parole. The judge lamented not being able to give him a death sentence. Attica was different from other prisons. It wasn't brutal, but it used excessive bureaucracy to wear down prisoners. Sutton spent time in isolation, calmed a potential prison riot in 1965, and witnessed the desegregation efforts during the civil rights movement. He wasn't allowed to have a job, talk to many inmates, or visit the commissary. In 1966, he had a chance to escape with other inmates, but declined. Realizing life as a fugitive was another form of prison, instead, he pursued a legal fight to overturn his convictions. Sutton partnered with Catherine Beitzies, a trial attorney, who helped him challenge his sentences. In 1968, Sutton's 4th offender conviction from 1934 was overturned, leading to a reduction in his 1952 gun charge sentence. Despite setbacks and delays, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court quashed his 1934 conviction and the Penn State escape charge. To avoid further appeals and a flood of petitions, the state agreed to drop the charges if Sutton accepted a misdemeanor for the Holmesburg escape. Back in New York, Sutton was resentenced for the Corn Exchange bank robbery and finally due for a parole hearing after 17 years in Attica. The judge argued for Sutton's release on compassionate grounds after taking into account his poor health and time served. Initially denied parole, Sutton's lawyer launched a publicity campaign. On Christmas Eve 1969, Sutton was released, ending 20 months of legal battles. He spent his final years in Florida, writing autobiographies and even starring in a bank commercial in 1976. Sutton passed away from emphysema on November 2nd, 1980. He had escaped prison 3 times, stolen an estimated $2 million, and spent over half his life behind bars. Reflecting on his life, Sutton admitted he loved robbing banks, feeling most alive during the heists. The thrill, more than the money, drove his actions. Thanks for joining us on this thrilling journey through the life and crimes of Willie Sutton. If you enjoyed this dive into true crime history, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with fellow crime enthusiasts. We have plenty more captivating stories coming your way. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.